Hello, Johnny from Dicebreaker here, back to talk a bit more about Magic: The Gathering, specifically Theros Beyond Death, the new expansion that welcomes you back to the realm of Theros with open arms, specifically the dank, chilling embrace of the Underworld. In case you missed it, I've already made one video on Theros Beyond Death, giving you a detailed description of the story and its key players. There's a card on screen now if you would like to give it a watch. Today though, we're going to be delving a bit deeper into this set, examining some of the cards and, most importantly, looking at 4 very good reasons to be excited for Theros Beyond Death. Let's get to it! This video is brought to you by Magic: The Gathering. The first reason to be excited for Theros Beyond Death is the way in which it reimagines a fond and familiar setting. As you almost certainly know, Theros Beyond Death returns Magic: The Gathering to the realm of Theros, which is heavily inspired by Greek mythology. By continuing the story of the realms of gods and monsters, heroes, and epic tales, which is something we'll get back to shortly, we not only get a set that's familiar, but we also get to see what's changed while we've been away. I've already covered what these changes look like for characters like Elspeth, the protagonist of Theros and Theros Beyond Death, so let's have a peek at 1 or 2 other examples. For example, the Underworld focus of Theros Beyond Death lets us learn a bit more about the lore of the Leonin with the card Leonin of the Lost Pride. The Leonin are a race of humanoid lions that featured in quite a few cards in the original Theros set. They're a band of warriors known for their ferocity in combat and for their superior tactics, which, apparently, are especially effective against minotaurs. In Theros Beyond Death, however, we get a glimpse of how these proud warriors view the afterlife. As you see in the card art, they're still fully arrayed in their battle gear, bright colours and all, and according to the card text, Leonin band together in the Underworld, taking solace in their strength until, at last, both pride and self are forgotten. And you know what? That's pretty cool. It's really tragic, don't get me wrong, but still, it's interesting to know these fierce and proud warriors view the Underworld as something to fight against. They try and resist the oblivion that's part and parcel of being in Nyx, and indeed, being dead, preserving their sense of self until the bitter end. I mean, the Leonin were pretty cool before, but you've absolutely got to respect them now. Of course, not all the familiar cards in Theros Beyond Death have quite such bleak implications. Some are essentially creatures we know and love, with a slightly different twist. For example, there were quite a few Krakens in the original Theros card block, and sure enough, they reappear in Theros Beyond Death. There's the Nadir Kraken, which allows you to pay mana to buff it and create a 1/1 tentacle creature token every time you draw a card, for example. But then there's also the Shoal Kraken. The interesting thing about this card is that it's a constellation, so while we've seen Krakens in Theros before, we've not had one with this specific keyword. The Shoal Kraken, for its part, is a helpful little beastie, giving you the option to draw a card, then discard a card anytime an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control. And there's something quite sweet about a Kraken using its tentacles to cycle your deck. It makes a nice change from dragging ships to a watery grave. Anyway. While it's exciting to revisit some of the cards and concepts we've seen before, mind you, returning to Theros is also a great opportunity to see some brand new creatures and bits of lore. So much so, in fact, it's our second reason to be excited. And, better yet, with this set so heavily focused on the Underworld, it should come as no surprise that some of them are pretty grim. The Blight Breath Katobalpass, for example, is a horned beastie that, from the looks of things, could really do with a breath mint. In addition to its shaggy coat, mangy tail, and, oh yes, an entirely exposed skull, the Blight Breath Katobalpass also comes packing a pretty nasty card effect. When it enters play, the target creature controlled by an opponent gets -XX until the end of the turn, with the value of X being equivalent to your devotion to black. Your devotion, in case you needed reminding, is a rating that increases with the number of permanents you have in play from a particular colour. So if you have 4 black permanents in play, when you bring in the Blight Breath Kotobel Pass, a target creature controlled by your opponent gets -4/4 until the end of the turn. And that is either very useful or very annoying, depending on your side of the table. This ability also fits quite nicely with the card text on the Blight Breath Kotobel Pass, saying wherever it walks, famine follows behind. Pestilence! Also new for Theros Beyond Death is the card Fruit of Tyzerus, featuring this picture of a man having an absolutely terrible time getting one of his 5 a day. The card itself is relatively straightforward. It deals 2 damage to the target player, but it's an especially cool one to have in the set regardless, as it's a great example of how the region of Theros is directly inspired by Greek mythology. See, fruit actually features pretty heavily in Greek myths and legends. The monster Typhon was weakened with poison fruit, the lotus features in the Odyssey as a fruit that induces drowsiness, and perhaps most famously, there's the story of Tantalus. Tantalus was a king punished by Zeus. Damned to suffer in Hades for all eternity, Tantalus stands in a pool of water next to a tempting fruit tree, yet, despite his thirst and hunger, he is unable to reach either. Despite the similar names, I'm not sure whether the story of Tantalus is the specific one being referenced by Fruit of Tyzerus, given he has actually managed to grab a bite to eat, but as I think we can all agree, the most important thing is that somebody is having an absolutely terrible time with some fruit. Like I say, there's no shortage of Greek influence in Theros Beyond Death, but to be honest, I think this card might well be my favourite. Sticking with the grisly theme, Theros Beyond Death also brings in Kroxa, Titan of Death's Hunger. Kroxa is one of the formerly imprisoned titans of Theros and, thereby, an enemy of the gods. For this reason, Kroxa is only able to reach the battlefield and stay there by way of Theros Beyond Death's new escape mechanic. Escape, as I'm sure you know, allows you to pay an alternate cost in order to cast a card from your graveyard as opposed to your hand. Kroxa is, quite frankly, very expensive to play, but then again he also packs a mighty punch. Whenever Kroxa enters the battlefield or attacks, each opponent must discard a card, and then if the opponent doesn't use that discard to get rid of a non-land card, then they take 3 damage. Brutal. And in case it wasn't already abundantly clear that Kroxa is up to no good, he also appears on this card, Eat to Extinction, which features his gaping maw ready to chow down on an unfortunate victim, and as the card text itself says, is not hunger that drives him, it's just in his nature to eat absolutely everything. And the best bit is, this isn't even the only card featuring an absolutely terrifying mouth crammed with teeth. Just look at Aspect of Lamprey. It's gross, and I love it. The third reason to be excited about Theros Beyond Death is the story. Now, we did already cover this in my last video, What is Theros Beyond Death, but for one thing it bears repeating, and another, there are still plenty of cards to look at. As a refresher, Theros Beyond Death continues the story of Elspeth, the former champion of Heliod, the sun god of Theros. Heliod struck Elspeth down the last time we visited Theros, sending our hero to the Underworld, specifically the realm of Elysia, the blissful home of fallen heroes. Unfortunately, her peaceful slumber has been disturbed by the corrupting influence of Ashiok, Nightmare Muse. Ashiok is a troublesome planeswalker who enjoyed a subplot in the last Theros set, but has now progressed into full-blown nemesis. There are some really interesting cards in Theros Beyond Death that help hammer home the story beats. Elspeth's Nightmare, for example, is a saga card depicting just how uneasy Elspeth's Rest has become in the Underworld of Theros as a direct result of Ashiok's influence. The card art features Elspeth with a hideous monster looming over the top of her, but let's face it, the truly nightmarish bit of this card is its final effect, which allows its player to exile their opponent's entire graveyard. Depending on how big that graveyard is at the time it comes into effect, this is potentially devastating. Ashiok's erasure, meanwhile, illustrates exactly what Ashiok is up to in the Underworld, namely putting unfortunate people in a headlock and stealing their souls. The delight on their face as they rob the essential essence of a helpless individual really helps hammer home just how powerful they've become since we last visited Theros, and just how much work Elspeth has cut out for her if she wants to defeat her rival Planeswalker and know peace again. At least she herself has come prepared, as shown by the artifact Shadow Spear, a black, otherworldly inversion of the weapon Elspeth used to wield when she was the Sun God's chosen. As the card itself says, a weapon of darkness for a warrior of light. As well as being a handy buff, Shadow Spear is also an indicator of how much her untimely demise has changed Elspeth, who, as you may remember, is now known as Elspeth Sun's Nemesis, which, let's face it, doesn't exactly bode brilliantly for Heliod. And very finally, the fourth reason to be excited for Theros Beyond Death is that it's available right now. You can play Theros Beyond Death in Magic the Gathering Arena, which I will remind you is entirely free to download. Or you can go to your local friendly game store and get your hands on some physical cards right now, depending on what time of day you're watching this, of course, because for all I know it's 3 in the morning wherever you are and your store is decidedly closed. But anyway, let's have a quick recap. Theros Beyond Death presents a fun new twist on something familiar, it introduces some great new creatures, it continues a great story that ties in really well to the card effects, and you can play it right now. And that about does it from me. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, there are loads more from Dicebreaker for you to watch. Some of them should be popping up on screen now, so do give one of those a click. Do like, subscribe, and ring the bell icon so you don't miss anything else from us, but most importantly, thank you very much for watching, and have a lovely day.